11 years ago, I typed 4 words into a resume that weren't true, and those 4 words eventually put 4,000 employees under my authority. This is the story of the week. Someone finally asked to see the diploma that never existed. My name doesn't matter for this story, so I'll just tell you what I did, and you can decide for yourself what you would have done in my place. 11 years ago, I was 29, $6,000 behind on rent, and 3 credits short of a business degree from a state school I'd stopped attending the semester my mother got sick. I want to be clear about that, because people here lied about a degree, and they picture someone lazy, someone who cut corners because corners were easy to cut. It wasn't like that. I had a 3.6 GPA and 11 credits left. Then my mother's kidneys failed, and I spent 14 months driving her to dialysis 3 times a week. And by the time she was stable again, my tuition assistance had expired, and my transcript sat frozen in a registrar's system, like a wound that never closed. I needed a job. Not a career, a job. Something with health insurance, because by then I also had a 2-year-old son, and his father had already started making noise about figuring things out in a city 1,100 miles away. So when I applied for an administrative coordinator position at a mid-sized logistics company called Kestrel Supply Co., I did something I'd never done before and told myself I'd never do again. I wrote BS, Business Administration, on my resume, next to a graduation year that had already passed. They didn't check. Small companies rarely did back then, not for entry-level admin roles. I got the job in 9 days. I want you to understand something about what happened next, because it's the part people don't expect. I didn't coast. I worked like the ground under me was already cracking, because in my head, it was. I fixed a shipping reconciliation error in my second month that had been bleeding the company $11,000 a quarter. I built a vendor tracking spreadsheet that got adopted company-wide. Within 2 years, I was managing a team of 6. Within 5, I was a director. The lie sat underneath everything like a stone in my shoe, but I kept walking, because stopping felt more dangerous than the stone. By year 8, I was vice president of operations. By year 11, I was 2 rungs from chief operating officer, sitting in rooms where people used my name as a verb. Let's get it Villanueva approved. And every single one of those rooms, I sat there thinking, someone is going to ask me for a piece of paper I don't have. Nobody ever did. Not for 11 years. The acquisition wasn't a surprise. Rumors had circulated for months. A national freight conglomerate called Harlow Beckett wanted Kestrel's regional distribution contracts, and everyone above the director level had been quietly bracing for a due diligence process that would tear the company open like a filing cabinet. What I didn't expect was how literal that would be. 6 weeks into the process, an email landed in my inbox from someone named Dale Ferris in HR compliance. Subject line: Executive credential verification required by Acquisition Counsel. Routine, he called it, standard for any executive being carried forward into the new organizational structure. All he needed was consent to contact my university's registrar to confirm degree conferral. I read that email 4 times standing at my own window, in an office with my name on the door, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade, the exact same fear I'd felt at 29, except now it had 4,000 people's jobs stacked on top of it. Because if Kestrel's executive team failed compliance review, the deal could stall, and 300 employees in a warehouse in Ohio were counting on that deal closing before their union contract renegotiation. I told Dale I'd sign the consent form by end of week. Then, I spent that week doing something I'm not proud of. I called the registrar's office myself, pretending to be verifying my own transcript for personal records, trying to find out exactly what would show up if someone pulled it. What showed up was worse than I expected. Not a degree, not a non-degree. A gap my enrollment retorted under my maiden name, Renata Osorio, which I'd stopped using the year I got married, 3 years into my time at Kestrel. Anyone doing a basic name match search would find nothing conclusive at all. It wasn't confirmation. It was a hole shaped exactly like a lie. I almost let it stay that way. A hole is deniable. A hole buys time. But that wasn't the strangest part of that week. The strangest part came 2 days later, when a junior analyst named Priya knocked on my office door, closed it behind her without being asked, and said, "Can I talk to you about something that isn't really my business?" Priya was 26, whip-smart, the kind of employee I'd have hired myself if I'd had the chance. She'd been pulled onto the acquisition's internal audit team to help cross-reference HR files against the due diligence checklist. She told me, hands shaking slightly, that she'd found the same discrepancy I already knew about. My registrar record, filed under a different name, no conferral date attached to either version. I braced for blackmail. I want to admit that, because it says something about what 11 years of hiding does to a person. It makes you assume the worst reflex in everyone else, because you know what your own worst reflex looks like. That's not what Priya wanted. She sat down across from me, and she told me her mother had been a mid-level manager at a hospital system in Fresno, and 14 years ago, someone discovered her mother had never finished her nursing administration certificate. And she was terminated within 6 hours, publicly, with no severance, in front of the department she'd run for a decade. Priya said her family lost their house within 8 months. She said she'd spent her whole life becoming exactly qualified for everything, obsessively, because of what she watched happen to her mother. And now here she was, sitting across from a woman who'd done what her mother did, except further, and for longer, and successfully. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this," she told me. "I don't know if I'm supposed to protect you or report you, and I hate that I even have to think about it." That conversation changed something in me, and not in the way you'd expect. It didn't make me more afraid of exposure. It made me realize how many people were standing exactly where I'd stood at 29. One bad semester, one sick parent, one missed rent payment away from a decision that would follow them for the rest of their working life, invisible and unforgivable at the same time. And it made me realize that the real danger wasn't Priya. It was the acquisition itself. Because 2 weeks later, Harlow Beckett's legal counsel circulated the final closing documents, and buried in Section 14 was something I hadn't fully understood until our general counsel explained it to me privately, off the record, over coffee he didn't drink. As part of the merger, every continuing executive was required to sign a personal affidavit attesting to the accuracy of their employment records, submitted as part of the SEC filing for the acquiring company, since Harlow Beckett was publicly traded. This wasn't a background check anymore. This was a federal filing. Signing that affidavit knowing it was false wasn't a firing offense. It was securities fraud, with my name on it, notarized. I had 4 days. I spent the first 2 of them doing what I imagine most people in my position do, running calculations. What did I actually stand to lose? A title, a salary that had let me put my son through a private high school, and God help the irony, was about to fund his first year of college. A reputation I built stone by stone with real work that was mine regardless of what a piece of paper said. And what did I stand to gain by signing? 4 more years of silence, maybe forever, if no one ever cross-referenced it again. But then I thought about Priya's mother, fired in 6 hours with no severance, no chance to explain 14 years of competent work. I thought about the version of this story where someone else finds the gap in my record 5 years from now, after I've signed federal documents claiming it doesn't exist. And I lose not just the job, but any legal ground to stand on at all. And then on the 3rd night, my son Mateo, 17, in the middle of writing his own college application essays at our kitchen table, asked me to look over his personal statement about watching his mother build a career from nothing through sheer competence. He used that exact phrase, sheer competence. I sat there rereading his sentence, and I understood all at once that I had 2 choices left, and only one of them let me look my son in the eye while he wrote that essay. I didn't sign the affidavit. Instead, I asked for a meeting with Kestrel's founder, Warren Beale, and Harlow Beckett's acquisition lead, 3 days before closing, with no lawyer of my own in the room, because I didn't want this to look like negotiation. I told them the truth in full. The degree I never finished, 11 years of a resume I never corrected, the maiden name gap in the registrar file, all of it. I told them I would resign effective immediately, before the affidavit was signed, so that no false document would ever enter federal filing under my name. Warren didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then, he told me something I hadn't expected. He said Kestrel's original controller, back when the company was 11 employees in a rented warehouse office, never finished college either, and Warren had known it for 30 years and never once cared, because the man had saved the company from bankruptcy twice. Paper tells you what someone was capable of once, he said. It doesn't tell you what they built. It didn't save my job. Harlow Beckett's counsel was unambiguous. Undisclosed credential fraud, discovered pre-closing, meant I couldn't be carried forward into the new executive structure, regardless of performance. I resigned that Friday. Kestrel gave me a severance package, and, at Warren's insistence, a neutral reference letter that described 11 years of operational results without ever mentioning a degree at all. Priya kept her job. She told me later she'd never actually decided whether to report me. She said watching me choose to walk away first had answered a question she'd been asking herself since Fresno. A question she still couldn't fully put into words. I don't know yet what comes next for me. I'm 43 years old, with 11 years of real, documented, verifiable achievement, and a resume with a hole in the middle of it that I finally have to explain out loud to every interviewer for the rest of my career. Mateo submitted his college applications last month. He still doesn't know the full story, only that I left my job over something complicated. Some nights I think I'll tell him everything the day he graduates, so he understands that the degree he's about to earn is worth more than any lie ever could have been. Other nights I think that's exactly the kind of story a person tells herself to feel better about a decision that cost her everything. I still don't know which one is true. Maybe both are. What I do know is this. For 11 years I was better at my job than almost anyone with the degree I never had. And I still don't know if that makes the lie forgivable, or if it just means I got away with it longer than I should have.